Section 115, Glamis Castle. In the first series of these stories and traditions, some allusions were made to the mystery, or rather many mysteries, attached to Glamis Castle, the Forfarshire seat of the Earl of Strathmore, but the legends investing this immense and ancient palace are inexhaustible. In point of antiquity and historical interest, the castle is one of the most remarkable edifices in the kingdom. Although dilapidated and dimmed in its original splendour, writes Dr. Beattie, its feudal air of strength and haughty defiance, and its sullen gloom of seclusion in an antique forest, is a subject peculiarly adapted for the pencil, and for exciting the imagination of the poet. Glamis Castle, or rather some portions of the magnificent old edifice, is one of immense antiquity. Indeed, it claims to be the most ancient inhabited castle in Scotland, but it has undergone, save in the central tower, manifold repairings and rebuildings. The first legend which lends historic importance to the place is that Duncan was there murdered by Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, even the very room in which the deed was done having been pointed out formerly, whilst in the armoury of the castle the sword and the shirt of mail worn by Macbeth are still shown. Local tradition points to the Hunter's Hill, an eminence overlooking the castle, as the spot where Malcolm II was attacked by the assassins. The Glamis estates first came into possession of the Lyon family in 1371 to 1372, when Sir John Lyon, feudal Baron of Fortivist, secretary and son-in-law to Robert II, received the grant of the lordship from that monarch. A long series of tragedies, we are informed, overgloomed the Lyons from the moment they brought to Glamis their lion cup, the original of Scott's Blessed Bear of Bradwardine, and a kind of family palladium like the look of Edenhall. Sir John Lyon, who was Great Chamberlain of Scotland, fell in a duel in 1383. His son, the grandson of King Robert II, married his cousin, another grandchild of the same monarch, and, unlike many inheritors of the estate, died a natural death. His son was raised to the dignity of the peerage in 1445 as Lord Glamis, and for some generations the Lyons lived and died in peace. The widow of the sixth Lord, Janet Douglas, a daughter of the Earl of Angus, together with her son Lord Glamis and other relatives, was indicted for attempting the life of King James V by witchcraft. Lady Glamis was found guilty on evidence afterwards confessed to have been fabricated, and, horrible to relate, was burned to death on the Castle Hill, Edinburgh, in 1537. The son of this unfortunate lady, having been respited till of age, was, ultimately, released and restored to his honours and estates. In 1578, John, 8th Lord Glamis, was slain in an accidental encounter with the Lindsays, the hereditary enemies of his race. In the following century an earldom, first of Kinghorn, and then of Strathmore and Kinghorn, was conferred upon the ruler of Glamis. The grandson of the first earl was slain at Sheriffmuir in 1715, and his brother and successor, Charles, died on the 11th of May 1728, in consequence, say the peerages, of an accidental wound received in a scuffle. According to the common story, however, his death was brought about in a duel over the gaming table. One authority relates it thus, in All the Year Round. The old feud between Lindsays and Lyons had so far healed over that the members of the two families dined and drank and diced together like fine old Scottish gentlemen as they were. According to local tradition, the play one night at Glamis was very high, and when its owner had lost all his money, he staked his estates, one after the other, against the victorious player. At last Glamis itself was set on the turn of a card, and lost. Then the head of the house, maddened by his losses, accused his guest of cheating. The reply was a blow. Swords were drawn, and after a few passes the victorious guest ran Lord Strathmore through the body, and thus sacrificed all his winnings. The Earl was really slain by James Carnegie of Finhaven. Thus far the tradition is clear and comprehensible enough, but other legends put a very different complexion on it. There is a secret room in Glamis Castle, and everybody knows, a room no mortal eye may behold, and the locality of which is known only to the possessor of the castle, his heir and his factor. This room is believed to have been the scene of a hideous gambling affair, and the hero of it was an Earl of Strathmore, said by William Howitt in his account of Glamis to have been Earl Beardy, whose portrait is at Abbotsford. Whoever the nobleman was, his name has been corrupted into that of Earl Patty by the Forfarshire peasantry, who, we are informed by Mr. Hugh MacLachlan, tell the following story of his misdeeds. Many, many years ago, when gentlemen got regularly drunk at dinner time and had to be carried to the bed by their servants, there reigned supreme at Glamis one Patty, known to fame as the Wild Earl of Strathmore. Earl Patty was notoriously good at all the vices, but his favourite vice was that of gambling. He would play Lord's Day or weekday, whatever day it was, and if he could find no one else to humour him in his fancy, he would hob and nob with the humblest menial within the castle walls. It happened once, on a dark and stormy November night, that Earl Patty had been wearied by his forced inactivity from horse and hound, for it was the Lord's Day, and that means complete abstinence from all worldly pursuits in bonny Scotland. And, at last, with oaths and curses, he called for a pack of cards, and comforted himself with the anticipation of a pleasant game. The ladies were at their devotions, so he called the servants to him, one by one, but never since the days of the feast in the New Testament were so many excuses invented to cover disinclination. Of all those who had humoured him so often, not one could be found, from the steward to the scullion, to take a hand with the wicked Earl. In desperation the chaplain was attacked, but he, too, proved temptation proof, and strengthened the rebellion among the menials by branding the pack of cards as devil's bricks, and hurling terrible anathemas at the head of any wight who should venture on so terrible a desecration of the Sabbath. For a time there was dire confusion and alarm in the castle, and at last Earl Patty, swearing tremendously, and consigning everybody around him to an unmentionable locality, seized a pack of cards and went growling away up the old oak stairs to his chamber, saying he would play with the Dale himself sooner than be thwarted in his desire. He had not sat long in the room before a knock came at the door, and a deep voice sounded from the corridor, asking the Earl if he wished a partner. "Yes," roared the Earl, "enter in the foul fiend's name, whoever you are." And with that there entered a tall, dark stranger, wholly wrapped up in a cloak, who nodded in a familiar manner to the Earl, and he took his seat on a vacant chair on the opposite side of the table. The Earl stared at his strange guest, and doubtless felt a momentary uneasiness as he remembered whom he had invited to play with him. But a look at the cards on the table reassured him, and they commenced the game in real earnest. The stranger, who did not remove his bonnet and cloak, proposed a high stake, and in reply the Earl said, if he were the loser and had not wherewith to discharge his debt, he would sign a bond for whatever his guest might choose to ask. Fast and furious became the game. Loud oaths resounded throughout the chamber, and the terrified menials crept up the corridor, wondering what brave man dared to bandy words with the wicked Earl, and who was sinful enough to hold his hand at the devil's bricks on the Lord's Day. As they fearfully listened, they could hear the fierce utterances of the Earl, and the fiercer and more unearthly utterances of the stranger, whose presence they were quite unable to account for. At last the old butler, who had served the family for 2 generations, ventured close to the chamber door and peeped through the keyhole. But no sooner had he done so than he fell back and rolled on the floor with a yell of agony that resounded to the remotest part of the castle. In an instant the door was rudely torn open, and the Earl came out with fury in his face, and told them to slay anyone who passed, while he went back to settle with his guest. But his guest was nowhere to be found. They searched the chamber through and through, but in vain. He was gone, and he had taken with him Earl Patty's bond, but what for the confused and startled Earl did not exactly know. Returning by the old butler, Earl Patty found him stunned and bruised, with a yellow circle round the erring eye, and then he told the terror-stricken menials that, as he sat at play, the stranger suddenly threw down his cards and said, with an oath, "Smite that eye!" whereupon a sheet of flame darted directly to the keyhole, and the mysterious stranger disappeared. Earl Patty lived 5 years before he paid his bond, but afterwards, on every Sabbath evening, The old chamber was filled with strange noises that echoed throughout the passages, as if the wicked Earl and the dark stranger were again wrangling and swearing over the devil's bricks. For a time the unearthly noises were put up with, but at last the room was built up, and nothing now remains to tell where the chamber was where the Earl Patty and his fiery guest played their stormy game of cards. Such is the story, according to local tradition, of the secret room of Glamis Castle. William Howitt's version of this tradition is that the famous Earl Beardy, Earl of Crawford, of whom there is a portrait at Abbotsford, famous for his rebellion against James II of Scotland and popularly known as the Wicked Laird, was playing at cards in the castle and, being warned to give over, as he was losing dreadfully, swore an oath that he would play till the day of judgment, whereupon the devil suddenly made his appearance, and as sudden disappearance with old Beardy and all his company. The room has never been found again, but the people believe firmly that old Beardy and his company are playing on, and will play till the day of judgment, and that on stormy nights the players are heard stamping and swearing in their rage over their play. But other and deeper mysteries than that told of Earl Patty, or Beardy, hover about the ancient and majestic castle. Those frowning towers, grey with age and sombre with time, hold within their strong walls tales of almost unspeakable terror, and within their gloomy rooms, if rumours speak true, terrible tragedies that have been enacted. Glamis, which a well-known traveller describes as one of the finest specimens of feudal architecture now existing, and as combining in a striking manner the gloom of prison security with the grandeur of a palace, is not so supremely interesting to outsiders for its magnitude or magnificence, its historical connections or its melancholy associations, as for seemingly impenetrable mysteries that belongs to it. The local legend of Earl Patty or Beardy will not account for what has been seen and heard. In 1880, a contributor to All the Year Round, whilst disclaiming all sympathy with ghost stories or mysteries of any kind, and declaring himself to be an utter skeptic as to all assumed supernatural manifestations, gave two strange incidents as given to him on good authority. The first narrative is told thus. A lady, very well known in London society, an artistic and social celebrity, wealthy beyond all doubts of the future, and what is called a very cultivated and instructured, but clear-headed and perhaps slightly matter-of-fact woman, went to stay at Glamis Castle for the first time. She was allotted very handsome apartments, just on the point of junction between the new buildings, perhaps 100 or 200 years old, and the very ancient part of the castle. The rooms were handsomely furnished. No gaunt carvings grinned from the walls, no grim tapestry swung to and fro, making strange figures look still stranger by the flickering firelight. All was smooth, cosy, and modern, and the guest retired to bed without a thought of the mysteries of Glamis. In the morning she appeared at the breakfast table, quite cheerful and self-possessed. To the inquiry how she had slept, she replied, "Well, thanks, very well, up to 4 o'clock in the morning. But your Scottish carpenters seem to come to work very early. I suppose they put up their scaffolding quickly, though, for they are quiet now." This speech produced a dead silence, and the speaker saw with astonishment that the faces of members of the family were very pale. She was asked, as she valued the friendship of all there, never to speak to them on that subject again. There had been no carpenters at Glamis Castle for months past. This fact, whatever it may be worth, is absolutely established, so far as the testimony of a single witness can establish anything. The lady was awakened by a loud knocking and hammering, as if somebody were putting up a scaffold, and the noise did not alarm her in the least. On the contrary, she took it for an accident, due to the presumed matutinal habits of the people. She knew, of course, that there were stories about Glamis, but had not the remotest idea that the hammering she had heard was connected with any story. She had regarded it simply as an annoyance, and was glad to get to sleep after an unrestful time, but had no notion of the noise being supernatural until informed of it at the breakfast table. To what particular event in the stormy annals of the Lyon family the hammering is connected is quite unknown, except to members of the family, but there is no lack of legends, possible and impossible, to account for any sights or sounds in the magnificent old feudal edifice. This same writer, after alluding to many of the tragic stories connected with Glamis, including the romantic episode of the renowned Bowes abduction case, proceeds to step into the dim borderland which separates tradition from fiction. It is said, remarks this authority, that once a visitor stayed at Glamis Castle for a few days, and, sitting up late one moonlight night, saw a face appear at the window opposite to him. The owner of the face, it was very pale, with great sorrowful eyes, appeared to wish to attract attention, but vanished suddenly from the window, as if plucked suddenly away by superior strength. For a long while the horror-stricken guest gazed at the window, in the hope that the pale face and great sad eyes would appear again. Nothing was seen at the window, but presently horrible shrieks penetrated even the thick walls of the castle, and rent the night air. An hour later, a dark huddled figure, like that of an old decrepit woman, carrying something in a bundle, came into the waning moonlight, and presently vanished. This writer hints at a very dreadful deed to explain the cause of the apparition, but, for some reason or the other, evades connecting the two tales by any intelligible method. He adds, however, that there is a more modern story of a stonemason, having been engaged at Glamis Castle on an important occasion, and having discovered, or been suspected of discovering, more than he should have, was supplied with a handsome competency upon the conditions that he emigrated, and preserved inviolable secrecy as to what he had learned. This writer continues, the employment of a stonemason is explained by the conditions under which the mystery is revealed to the successive heirs and factors. The abode of the dread secret is in a part of the castle, also haunted by the apparition of a bearded man who flits about at night, but without committing any other objectionable action. What connection, if any, the bearded spectre may have with the mystery is not even guessed. He hovers at night over the couches of children for an instant, and then vanishes. The secret itself abides in a room, a secret chamber, the very situation of which, beyond a general idea that it is in the most ancient part of the castle, is unknown. Where walls are 15 feet thick, it is not impossible to have a chamber so concealed that none but the initiated can guess its position. It was once attempted by a madcap party of guests to discover the locality of the secret chamber by hanging their towels out the window, and thus deciding in favour of any window from which no spotless banner waved. But this escapade, which is said to have been ill received by the most interested, ended in nothing but a vague conclusion that the old square tower must be the spot sought. It seems to have been forgotten by these harum-scarum mystery hunters that a secret chamber might well be like the curious places of concealment called priests' holes, so common in old English country houses, and the only mystery whereof is how the unfortunate hidden tenants could breathe in them. It is in the secret chamber of Glamis Castle that the mystery is revealed to the next heir, and to the new factor when one is appointed. This much is known beyond all possible doubt. It is also assumed from the stonemason story, and the mysterious sounds frequently heard, that the secret chamber is approached by a passage duly closed with masonry after every visit. This latter conclusion may or may not have been correct, but the existence of a mystery of some kind is concealed within a secret chamber is fairly well made out. No wonder that this writer asks, and many others repeat the question, what is this mystery? Of all the many attempted hypotheses, not one may be deemed conclusive, but few probable or even possible. It has been suggested, contrary to the proven facts, if proof were needed, that the beautiful and unfortunate Lady Glamis, the supposed witch, the victim of acknowledged perjury, who perished amid the flames on Castle Hill at Edinburgh, was actually in commerce with the evil one, and that her familiar demon, an embodied and visible fiend, endures unto this day, shut from the light at Glamis Castle. Another wild suggestion is, that owing to some hereditary curse, like those believed to rest on many well-known families, at certain intervals a kind of vampire is born into the family of the Strathmore Lyons. It is scarcely possible to destroy this monstrosity. It is, therefore, kept concealed till its term of life is run. But it might be remembered, even monsters need nourishment, and this secret chamber at Glamis is only visited once in a generation. Other theories and suggestions are equally unfortunate, and no probable solution of the mystery has yet been given. Thus far we have shown that strange sights and stranger sounds are reported upon good authority to have been seen and heard at Glamis. Moreover, it may be assumed that there is a family secret concealed within the depths of the old castle, and that the facts about it are never known to more than 3 persons. The 3 persons who have to hide within their bosoms this grim secret are the Earl of Strathmore for the time being, the heir apparent, if he have attained his majority, and the factor, or as he might be termed in England, the house steward. On the night before he attains his 21st birthday, the heir, who bears the courtesy title of Lord Glamis, is solemnly initiated in the terrible mystery by the reigning Earl and his factor, and this secret he has to preserve until the majority of his own son, or, if he remains sonless, till the coming of age of his heir presumptive, until the appointment of another factor to the property. Why the factor should be instructed in this terrible matter, says one of our authorities, is a question which has excited, and continues to excite, the Caledonian mind to a remarkable degree. If the office of factor were hereditary, there would be an apparent reason for taking such an important functionary into the family confidence. But this is not the case in Scotland as a rule. In fact, the balance of experience is very greatly on the other side. The factor is sometimes a poor relation of the great house, but frequently a retired officer or a country gentleman unconnected with his employers by ties of blood. There is nothing in the occupation of a factor greatly in excess of that of an agent, saving that he is resident on the property instead of living in the nearest large town. There is no reason why the connection between employer and factor should not be brought to an end at any time by individual or mutual dissatisfaction. There is, however, no record of any factor having disclosed any inkling of the mystery of Glamis. As a Strathmore succeeds. There is generally much talk of an old story being exploded at last. Gay gallants in lace ruffles, Venus, books, bloods, and dandies have, until their 21st birthday, made light of the family mystery, and some have gone so far as to make after-dinner promises to hoist the old ghost with his own petard, and tell the whole stupid old story in the smoking-room at night, after the coming-of-age humbug was all over. This promise has been made more than once, but it has never been kept. No heir to the Strathmore peerage has revealed the secret. On the morrow, when all looked for an explanation of the terrible mystery, they were met by a courteous but cold refusal. A simple statement that the fulfilment of the rash promise was impossible, a request to say no more about it, and thus the matter had ended. And so the mystery of Glamis Castle remains a mystery still.
Section 118. Heath Old Hall. There are 3 halls at Heath, near Wakefield, but the one known as the Old Hall, at present occupied by Edward Green, Esquire, is that which bears the reputation of being haunted. It is a truly magnificent and palatial pile of buildings, and has been well described to us as one of the finest specimens remaining in Yorkshire of the Elizabethan period of architecture. The hall was built for John Kay of Dalton. The windows were formerly emblazoned with the arms of many of the chief nobility of England, but these have disappeared, such painted glass as there is there now having been brought over by some nuns, with whom, it is said, was a princess of Condé, who resided at the hall during the revolutionary troubles abroad. Mr. John Batty, to whom we are indebted for much of the following information, says the Kays were succeeded in possession of the old hall by William Witham, Esquire. This owner died in 1593, and it is not improbable that some peculiar circumstances which attended his disease and death first obtained for the place its curious reputation. His illness and its fatal termination were ascribed to demoniacal agency, and a poor woman of the neighborhood, named Mary Pennall, who lay under the suspicion of being a witch, was arrested and executed for the supposed crime at York. William Witham's son Henry dying without issue, Heath Old Hall became the property of his sister Mary, wife of Thomas Jobson of Cudworth, whose family had grown rich upon the plunder of Abbey lands, another very potent reason for an uncanny fame being acquired by the race. Her first husband dying, Mary took for a second Thomas Bowles of Osberton, Nottinghamshire. Mary Bowles, whether for her loyalty or wealth is not stated, was created a baronetess of Scotland, with the remainder to her heirs whatever by James I. in 1635. If not a solitary, still a very rare instance of such a title having been conferred. Lady Bowles lived in great state at the Old Hall, and, after much wealth and prosperity, died there in 1662, when 83. Her interment did not take place until 6 weeks after her decease, she having assigned £120, a very much larger sum then than now, for keeping open house for all comers during that time. Her will, only signed the day before her death, besides containing a number of charitable bequests, legacies to relatives and friends, and £200 for the erection of her tomb, further provides for the funeral festivities as follows: I give all my fat beeves and fat sheep to be disposed of at the direction of my executors, whom I charge to perform it nobly, and really to bestow this, my gift and good provision, 2 hogshead of wine or more, as they shall see cause, and that several hogsheads of beer be taken care for, there being no convenience to brew. And my bedding being plundered from me, I desire that the chambers may be well furnished with beds, borrowed for the time, for the entertaining of such as shall be thought fit lodgers. Besides these arrangements, Lady Bowles left £700 to be expended in mourning, and £400 for funeral expenses, and charged her executors most earnestly to see her will exactly performed, adding that if any person interested in it obstructed them in any degree, he or she should forfeit all claim to any benefit from it. The Old Hall fell to the share of Sir William Dalston, in right of his wife Anne, daughter of Lady Bowles by her second husband, but, after changing hands more than once, passed by purchase to John Smith, Esquire, of Heath, from whom it descended to Captain Smith, of the Grenadier Guards, its present possessor. The Hall and its environs, says Mr. John Batty, are beautifully described as Emilia Monterio, a ballad by Mr. W. H. Letham, on a young Portuguese lady who lived with the nuns when they inhabited the Hall some 60 years ago. But the grand feature about this magnificent old Hall is that it is haunted, and by the apparition of Lady Bowles. Her ladyship is said to walk and disturb the neighbourhood, but her favourite resort is a fine banqueting room, with a splendid carved stone chimney-piece, upon which are the Witham arms. Hunter, the Yorkshire antiquarian, deems that the lady's restlessness in the grave may probably be connected with the romantic circumstances surrounding her father's death, whilst others think it due to the non-observance by her executors of certain clauses in her will. According to this latter account, the lady long walked in Heath Grove, till at length she was conjured down into a hole of the river near the Hall, called to this day Bull's Pit. The spell, however, was not so powerful but that she still rises and makes a fuss now and then. A tradition, however, exists in Heath that a room in the edifice which she had walled up for a certain period, because large sums of money had been gambled away in it, was opened before the stipulated time expired, hence the restlessness of Lady Bowles. At any rate, even nowadays she is reported to be seen sometimes gliding along the passages of the house she once inhabited in the flesh, whilst servants in a neighbouring residence have refused to go out after dark, as they have repeatedly seen at dusk a tall woman dressed in antiquated style, in the coach road of Heath Old Hall. One correspondent, as evidence of the general feeling of the neighborhood about this time-honored apparition, informs us that when at Ledsham, some time since, he was looking over the tomb in the north chancel, beneath which Lady Bowles lies buried, when two little lads whispered to him, "Don't go there, master, there's tall Lord." Anglesey, the devil.
Section 119. Hinton Ampner Manor House. In the life of the Reverend Richard Barham, author of the Inglesby Legend, by his son, the Reverend R. H. Dalton Barham, some extraordinary particulars are given respecting the haunting of Hinton Ampner Manor House in Hampshire. Mr. Barham, who had recorded the story in his notebook for 1836, obtained the details from a Mrs. Hughes, who derived them originally from Mrs. Gwynn, a personal witness of the wonders referred to. The latter lady's account was subsequently confirmed by several persons, including the late Duchess of Buckingham, a resident of the neighborhood. The story, as told by Mrs. Hughes, says the Reverend Dalton Barham, though substantially accurate as to incidents, contains some important errors in the respect of the dramatis personae. These were, I regret, reproduced in the second edition of my father's life. I have now, however, thanks to the kindness of certain members of the family mainly interested, the means of correcting them, and of presenting an authentic account of the haunted house in Hampshire. Mr. Barham then proceeds to narrate the events connected with the presumed supernatural manifestations at Hinton Ampner, and his account we shall chiefly follow, correcting and amplifying it where necessary from the voluminous notes and affidavits cited in the Gentleman's Magazine for November and December 1872, to which periodical the whole affair was communicated under the title A Hampshire Ghost Story. Mrs. Ricketts, the lady chiefly concerned with the following narrative, was a woman of aristocratic connections. Her brother was the famous Admiral Jervis, afterwards Earl St. Vincent, and other members of her family held high positions in church and state. Her husband, William Henry Ricketts, a bencher of Gray's Inn, was a West Indian landowner, and it was during a somewhat lengthy visit which he paid to his estates in Jamaica that Mrs. Ricketts resided, with her 3 infant children and servants, in the old manor house of Hinton Ampner, near Alresford, in Hampshire. Previous to recounting particulars of the series of strange sights and sounds, the effects of which rendered Mrs. Ricketts' continued occupation in the old manor house an impossibility, it should be premised that the lady, according to all accounts, was a woman of remarkable vigor, both physical and mental. The coolness and courage with which Mrs. Ricketts endured for so long a period the disturbances at the old Hampshire residence certainly speaks strongly in favor of her good sense, and her physical capacity may not inaptly be gauged by the fact that she preserved her intellectual powers unimpaired to the advanced age of 91. Her second son, Edward Jervis, who succeeded his elder brother as Viscount St. Vincent, it may be mentioned, was 92 when he died. He is said to have inherited the fine and powerful intellect of his mother. The mansion of Hinton Ampner, where in 1771 Mrs. Ricketts took up her residence, had for many generations been in possession of the Stukely family, and on the death of Sir Hugh Stukely, the last male heir passed, by right of his wife, to Edward, Lord Stawell. On the evening of April 2nd, 1755, this nobleman, whilst sitting in the little parlour at Hinton, died suddenly of apoplexy, after having articulated a few words. For the next 10 years, the house, now become the property of the Right Honourable Henry Bilson Legge, husband of Lord Stawell's daughter, was left chiefly in the occupation of servants, Mr. Legge only visiting it for a month or so during the shooting season. At his death in 1764, his widow let it to Mr. Ricketts. For some time prior to the arrival of the new tenants, the house seems to have been gradually acquiring an evil reputation. Strange sounds were said to have been heard in it, and strange sights seen. In particular, it was asserted that the figure of a gentleman in a drab-coloured coat, standing in the moonlight, with his hands behind him, after the manner of the late Lord Stawell, was seen by a groom, and recognized by him as that of his deceased master. These reports, however, do not seem to have reached the ears of either Mr. or Mrs. Ricketts, although they had not long been settled at Hinton before their attention was aroused by certain noises which they themselves heard in the night, as of persons opening and shutting doors with violence. Mr. Ricketts frequently went round the house in the hope of detecting the offenders, but failing in his efforts to discover the cause of these disturbances, and supposing some ill-disposed persons possessed keys which gave them admission to the house, he had all the locks changed, but with no better result. The noises were repeated from time to time, yet apparently without causing any great annoyance to the family. Towards the close of 1769, Mr. Ricketts was called away to Jamaica, and his wife, who was not only a woman of remarkable vigor, both physical and mental, but whose good sense had acquired additional strength under the training of the learned Nicholas Tyndall, determined to remain at home with her 3 infant children. There were also in the house 8 servants, all of whom, it is to be observed, left it from various causes in the course of the following year, and were replaced by others. Soon after the departure of Mr. Ricketts, the disturbances became more serious. The servants got frightened. Mrs. Ricketts herself, among other inexplicable sounds, frequently heard the rustling of silk clothes and the steps of someone walking in the adjoining room or lobby. On one occasion, she plainly distinguished the tread of a man walking heavily toward the foot of her bed. Here it will be as well to furnish some extracts from the account drawn up by Mrs. Ricketts herself of the extraordinary affair. About 6 months after we came thither, is Mrs. Ricketts' personal record, Elizabeth Brailsford, nurse to our eldest son Henry, then about 8 months old, was sitting by him when asleep in the room over the pantry, appropriated for the nursery, and being a hot summer's evening, the door was open that faces the entrance into the yellow bedchamber, which, with the adjoining dressing-room, was the apartment usually occupied by the lady of the house. She was sitting directly opposite to this door, and plainly saw, as she afterwards related, a gentleman in a drab-colored suit of clothes go into the yellow room. She was in no way surprised at the time, but on the housemaid, Molly Newman, coming up with her supper, she asked what strange gentleman had come. Upon the other answering there was no one, she related what is already described, and desired her fellow servant to accompany her to search the room. This they did immediately, without any appearance of what she had seen. She was much concerned and disturbed, and she was thoroughly assured that she could no ways be deceived, the light being sufficient to distinguish any object clearly. In some time after it was mentioned to me. I treated it as the effect of fear or superstition, to which the lower class of people are so prone, and it was entirely obliterated from my mind till the late astonishing disturbances brought to my recollection this and other previous circumstances. In the autumn of the same year, George Turner, the son of the gardener of that name, who was then groom, crossing the great hall to go to bed, saw at the other end a man in a drab-colored coat, whom he concluded to be the butler who wore such colored clothes, he being lately come and his livery not made. As he passed immediately upstairs to the room where all the men-servants lay, he was in great astonishment to find the butler and the other men-servants in bed. Thus the person he had seen in the hall remained unaccounted for. Like the same person before described by the nurse, and George Turner, now living, avers these particulars in the same manner he first related them. In the month of July, 1767, about 7 in the evening, there were sitting in the kitchen Thomas Wheeler, postilion, Ann Hall, my own woman, Sarah, waiting woman to Mrs. Mary Ponitz, and Dame Lacey. The other servants were out, excepting the cook, then employed in washing up her things in the scullery. The persons in the kitchen heard a woman come downstairs, and along the passage leading towards them, whose clothes rustled as of the stiffest silk, and on their looking that way, the door standing open, a female figure rushed past, and out of the door as they conceived. Their view of her was imperfect, but they plainly distinguished a tall figure in dark-colored clothes. Dame Brown, the cook, instantly coming in, this figure passed close by her, and instantly disappeared. She described the person and drapery as before mentioned, and they all united in astonishment who or what this appearance could be, and their surprise was heightened when a man, coming directly through the yard and into the house the way she went out, on being asked who the woman was he met, declared he had seen no one. Some time after Mr. Ricketts left me, continues the lady, I, then lying in the bedroom over the kitchen, heard frequently the noise of someone walking in the room within, and the rustling, as of silk clothes, against the door that opened into my room, sometimes so loud and of such continuance as to break my rest. Instant search being often made, we never could discover any appearance of human or brute being. Repeatedly disturbed in the same manner, I made it my constant practice to search the room and closets within, and to secure the only door that led from the room on the inside in such a manner as to be certain no one could gain entrance without passing through my own apartment, which was always made fast by a drawbolt on the door. Yet this precaution did not preclude the disturbance, which continued with little interruption. Mrs. Ricketts then proceeds to furnish the names and various other particulars of the different domestics she had employed during her residence at the old manor house, remarking, "I mention these changes among my domestics, though in themselves unimportant, to evince the impossibility of a confederacy, for the course of nearly 7 years, and with a succession of different persons, so that at the time of my leaving Hinton I had not one servant that had lived with me at my first going thither, nor for some time afterwards. In the summer of 1770, one night that I was lying in the yellow bedchamber, the same I have mentioned that the person in drab-colored clothes was seen to enter. I had been in bed half an hour, thoroughly awake, and without the least terror or apprehension on my spirits. I plainly heard the footsteps of a man, with plodding step, walking towards the foot of my bed. I thought the danger too near to ring my bell for assistance, but sprang out of bed, and in an instant was in the nursery opposite, and with Hannah Streeter and a light I returned to search for what I had heard, but all in vain. There was a light burning in the dressing-room within, as usual, and there was no door or means of escape save the one that opened to the nursery. This alarm perplexed me more than any preceding, being within my own room, the footsteps as distinct as I ever heard, myself perfectly awake and collected. I had nevertheless resolution to go to bed alone in the same room, and did not form any conclusion as to the cause of this very extraordinary disturbance. For some months afterward I did not hear any noise that particularly struck my attention, till in November of the same year, I then being removed to the chintz bedroom over the hall, as a warmer apartment, I once or twice heard sounds of harmony, and one night in particular I heard 3 distinct and violent knocks, as given with a club or something very ponderous, against a door below stairs. It occurred to me that housebreakers must be forcing into some apartment, and I immediately rang my bell. No one hearing the summons, and the noise ceasing, I thought no further of it at the time. After this, and in the beginning of the year 1771, I was frequently sensible of a hollow murmuring that seemed to possess the whole house. It was independent of wind, being equally heard on the calmest nights, and it was a sound I had never been accustomed to hear. On the morning of the 27th February, when Elizabeth Godin came into my room, I inquired what weather. She replying in a very faint tone, I asked if she were ill. She said she was well, but had never in her life been so terrified as during the preceding night, that she had heard the most dismal groans and fluttering round her bed most of the night, that she had got up to search the room and up the chimney, and though it was a bright moonlight, she could not discover anything. I did not pay much attention to her account, but it occurred to me that should anyone tell her it was the room formerly occupied by Mrs. Parfait, the old housekeeper, she would be afraid to lie there again. Mrs. Parfait dying a few days before at Kilmston, was brought and interred in Hinton churchyard the evening of the night this disturbance happened. That very day 5 weeks, being the 2nd of April, I waked between 1 and 2 o'clock, as I found by my watch, which, with a rushlight, was on a table close to my bedside. I lay thoroughly awake for some time, and then heard 1 or more persons walking to and fro in the lobby adjoining. I got out of bed and listened at the door for the space of 20 minutes, in which time I distinctly heard the walking, with the addition of a loud noise, like pushing strongly against a door. Being thus assured my senses were not deceived, I determined to ring my bell, to which I had before much reluctance, on account of disturbing the nursery maid, who was very ill of a fever. Elizabeth Godin, during her illness, lay in the room with my sons, and came immediately on hearing my bell. Thoroughly convinced there were persons in the lobby, before I opened my door, I asked her if she saw no one there. On her replying in the negative, I went out to her, examined the window, which was shut, looked under the couch, the only furniture of concealment there. The chimney board was fastened, and when removed, all was clear behind it. She found the door into the lobby shut, as it was every night. After this examination I stood in the middle of the room, pondering with much astonishment, when suddenly the door that opened into the little recess leading to the yellow apartment sounded as if played to and fro by a person standing behind it. This was more than I could bear unmoved. I ran into the nursery and rang the bell there that goes to the men's apartments. Robert Camus came to the door at the landing place, which door was every night secured, so that no person could get to that floor unless through the windows. Upon opening the door to Robert, I told him the reason. I had to suppose that someone was entrenched behind the door before I mentioned, and, giving him a light and arming him with a billet of wood, myself and Elizabeth Godin waited the event. Upon opening the door, there was not any being whatever, and the yellow apartment was locked, the key hanging up, and a great bolt drawn across the outside door, as usual, when not in use. There was then no further retreat or hiding place. After dismissing Robert and securing the door, I went to bed in my son's room, and about half an hour afterwards heard 3 distinct knocks, as described before. They seemed below, but I could not then or ever after ascertain the place. The next night I lay in my own room. I now and then heard noises, and frequently the hollow murmur. On the 7th of May, exactly the day 5 weeks from the 2nd of April, this murmur was uncommonly loud. I could not sleep, apprehending it to the prelude to some greater noise. I got up and went to the nursery, stayed there till half an hour past 3, and then, being daybreak, I thought I should get some sleep in my own apartment. I returned and lay till 10 minutes before 4, and then the great hall door directly under me was slapped to with the utmost violence, so as to shake my room perceivably. I jumped out of bed to the window that commands the porch. There was a light to distinguish every object, but none to be seen that could account for what I had heard. Upon examining the door, it was found fast locked and bolted as usual. From this time I determined to have my woman lie in a little bed in my room. The noises grew more frequent, and she was always sensible of the same sounds, and much in the same direction as they struck me. Harassed and perplexed, I was yet very unwilling to divulge my embarrassment. I had taken every method to investigate the cause, and could not discover the least appearance of trick. On the contrary, I became convinced it was beyond the power of any mortal agent to perform. But knowing how exploded such opinions were, I kept them in my own bosom, and hoped my resolution would enable me to support whatever might befall. After midsummer, the noises became every night more intolerable. They began before I went to bed, and with intermissions were heard till after broad day in the morning. I could frequently distinguish inarticulate sounds, and usually a shrill female voice would begin, and then 2 others with deeper and manlike tone seemed to join in the discourse. Yet though this conversation sounded as if close to me, I never could distinguish words. I have often asked Elizabeth Godin if she heard any noise, and of what sort. She is often described as seeming conversation in the manner I have related, and other noises. One night in particular, my bed curtains rustled, and sounded as if dragged by a person walking against them. I then asked her if she heard any noise, and of what kind. She spoke of it exactly in the manner I have done. Several times I heard sounds of harmony within the room, no distinct or regular notes, but a vibration of harmonious tones. Walking, talking, knocking, opening and slapping of doors were repeated every night. My brother, Captain John Jervis, afterwards Earl St. Vincent, who had not long before returned from the Mediterranean, had been to stay with me, yet so great was my reluctance to relate anything beyond the bounds of probability, that I could not bring myself to disclose my embarrassed situation to the friend and brother who could most essentially serve and comfort me. The noises continuing in the same manner when he was with me, I wished to learn if he had heard them, and one morning I carelessly said, "I was afraid last night the servants would disturb you, and rang my bell to order them to bed." He replied he had not heard them. The morning after he left me to return to Portsmouth, about 3 o'clock in daylight, Elizabeth Godin and myself both awake. She had been sitting up in bed looking round her, expecting, as she always did, to see something terrible. I heard with infinite astonishment the most loud, deep, tremendous noise, which seemed to rush and fall with infinite velocity and force on the lobby floor adjoining to my room. I started up and called to Godin, "Good God, did you hear that noise?" She made no reply. On repeating the question, she answered with a faltering voice. She was so frightened she scarce durst speak. Just that instant we heard a shrill and dreadful shriek, seeming to proceed from under the spot where the rushing noise fell, and repeated 3 or 4 times, growing fainter as it seemed to descend, till it sank into earth. Hannah Streeter, who lay in the room with my children, heard the same noises, and was so appalled she lay for 2 hours, almost deprived of sense and motion. Having heard little of the noises preceding, and that little she did not regard, she had rashly expressed a wish to hear more of them, and from that night till she quitted the house there was scarce a night passed that she did not hear the sound, as if some person walked towards her door and pushed against it, as though attempting to force it open. This alarm, so more than commonly horrible, determined me to impart the whole series to my brother on his return to Hinton, expected in a week. The frequency of the noises, harassing to my rest, and getting up often at unreasonable hours, fixed a slow fever and deep cough. My health was much impaired, but my resolution firm. I remained in anxious expectation of my brother, and he being detained a week longer at Portsmouth than he had foreseen, it occurred to me to endeavour, by changing my apartment, to obtain a little rest. I removed to that formerly occupied by Elizabeth Godin. I did not mention my intention till 10 at night, when the room was prepared, and I went to bed soon after. I had scarce lain down when the same noises surrounded me that I had before related, and I mentioned the circumstance of change in my room without previous notice, to prove the impossibility of a plan of operations being so suddenly conveyed to another part of the house, were they such as human agents could achieve. The week following I was comforted by the arrival of my brother. However desirous to impart the narrative, I yet forebode till the next morning. I wished him to enjoy a night's rest, and therefore contented myself with preparing him to hear on the morrow the most astonishing tale that ever assailed his ears, and that he must summon all his trust of my veracity to meet my relation. He replied it was scarce possible for me to relate any matter he could not believe, little divining the nature of what I had to offer to his faith. The next morning I began my narrative, to which he attended with mixed surprise and wonder. Just as I had finished, Captain Luttrell, our neighbour at Kilmston, chancing to call, induced my brother to impart the whole to him, who in a very friendly manner offered to unite his endeavours to investigate the cause. It was then agreed he should come late in the evening, and divide the night watch between them, keeping profoundly secret that there was any such intention. My brother took the precaution, accompanied by his own servant, John Bolton, to go into every apartment, particularly those on the first and attic story, examined every place of concealment, and saw each door fastened, save those to chambers occupied by the family. This done, he went to bed in the room over the servants' hall. Captain Luttrell and my brother's man with arms sat up in the chintz room adjoining, and my brother was to be called on any alarm. I lay that night in Elizabeth Godin's room, and the children in the nurseries. Thus every chamber on that floor was occupied. I bolted and locked the door that opened to that floor from the back stairs, so there was no entrance unless through the room where Captain Luttrell kept watch. So soon as I lay down, I heard a rustling, as of a person close to the door. I ordered Elizabeth Godin to sit up for a while, and if the noise continued, to go and acquaint Mr. Luttrell. She heard it, and instantly Mr. Luttrell's room door was thrown open, and we heard him speak. I must now give his account, as related to my brother and myself the next morning. He said he heard the footsteps of a person walking across the lobby, that he instantly threw the door open and called, "Who goes there?" That something flitted past him, when my brother directly called out, "Look against my door." He was awake, and heard what Mr. Luttrell had said, and also the continuance of the same noise till it reached his door. He arose and joined Mr. Luttrell. Both astonished, they heard various other noises, examined everywhere, found the staircase door fast secured as I had left it. I lay so near, and had never closed my eyes. No one could go to that door unheard. My brother and his man proceeded upstairs, and found the servants in their own rooms, and all doors closed, as they had seen just before. They sat up together, my brother and Mr. Luttrell, till break of day, when my brother returned to his own chamber. About that time, as I imagined, I heard the chintz room door opened and slammed to with the utmost violence, and immediately that of the hall chamber opened and shut in the same manner. I mentioned to Godin my surprise that my brother, who was ever attentive not to alarm or disturb the children, should hazard both by such vehement noise. An hour after I heard the house door open and slam in the same way, so as to shake the house. No one person was then up, for, as I had never slept, I heard the servants rise and go down about half an hour afterwards. When we were assembled at breakfast, I observed the noise my brother had made with the doors. Mr. Luttrell replied, "I assure you, Jervis made not the least noise. It was your door and the next I heard open and slapped in the way you describe." My brother did not hear either. He afterwards acknowledged to me that when gone to bed, and Mr. Luttrell and I were sitting below, he heard dreadful groans and various noises that he was then and after unable to account for. His servant was at that time with mine below. Captain Luttrell declared the disturbances of the preceding night were of such a nature that the house was an unfit residence for any human being. My brother, though more guarded in his expressions, concurred in that opinion, and the result of our deliberations was to send an express to Mr. Sainsbury, Lady Hillsborough's steward, to request he would come over immediately on a very particular occasion, with which he would be made acquainted on his arrival. Unluckily, Mr. Sainsbury was confined with the gout, and sent over his clerk, a youth of 15, to whom we judged it useless and improper to divulge the circumstances. My brother sat up every night of the week he then passed at Hinton. In the middle of one of those nights I was surprised with the sound of a gun or pistol let off near me, immediately followed by groans, as of a person in agonies or expiring, that seemed to proceed between my chamber and the next, the nursery. I sent Godin to Nurse Horner to ask if she had heard any noise. She had not. Upon my inquiry the next morning of my brother, he had not heard it, though the report and groans were loud and deep. Several instances occurred where very loud noises were heard by one or two persons, when those equally near and in the same direction were not sensible of the least impression. As the watching every night made it necessary for my brother to gain rest in the day, he usually lay down after dinner. During one of these times he was gone to rest. I had sent the children and their attendants out to walk, the dairymaid gone to milk, the cook in the scullery, my own woman with my brother's man sitting together in the servants' hall. I, reading in the parlour, heard my brother's bell ring with great quickness. I ran to his room, and he asked me if I had heard any noise, because, said he, as I was lying wide awake, an immense weight seemed to fall through the ceiling to the floor, just by that mahogany press, and it is impossible I should be deceived. His man was by this time come up, and said he was sitting underneath the room, as I before mentioned, and heard not the least noise. The inquiry and attention my brother devoted to investigate this affair was such as, from the reach of his capacity and ardent spirit, might be expected. The result was his earnest request that I would quit the place, and when obliged to return to Portsmouth, that I would permit him to send Mr. Nichols, his lieutenant of marines, and an old friend of the family, to continue till my removal with me. One circumstance is of a nature so singularly striking that I cannot omit to relate it. In one of our evening conversations on this wonderful train of disturbances, I mentioned a very extraordinary effect I had frequently observed in a favourite cat that was usually in the parlour with me, and when sitting on table or chair with accustomed unconcern, she would suddenly slink down, as if struck with the greatest terror, conceal herself under my chair, and put her head close to my feet. In a short space of time she would come forth quite unconcerned. I had not long given him this account before it was verified to him in a striking manner. We neither then, nor I at other times, perceived the least noise that could give alarm to the animal, nor did I ever perceive the like effect before these disturbances, nor afterwards, when she was removed with me to another habitation. The servants gave the same account of a spaniel that lived in the house, but to that, as I did not witness, I cannot testify. Various causes, as Mr. Barham records, were assigned in the neighbourhood for these supernatural visitations. The most popular reason was that which connected the late Lord Stawell, a notorious evil liver, with the manifestations. He had had in his employment as a bailiff a certain Isaac Mackerel, a man with a remarkably hoarse guttural voice, and one who is declared to have been well, or rather ill known as a pander to his master's vices. Although Mackerel had been detected in robbing his master, he was retained in his service, having evidently some private hold upon him. There had resided in the manor house with Lord Stawell a younger sister of his deceased wife, and it was rumoured a guilty intrigue had been carried on between these two. Though no child was known positively to have been born, strong suspicions had been entertained on that score by the village gossips. The lady died at Hinton in 1754. In the year following, Lord Stawell, as has been said, expired in a fit of apoplexy, and some time after the steward was killed by the fall of a faggot stack. Mrs. Ricketts and her friends endeavoured to trace out the origin of these rumours, but without much success. One day, indeed, an old man living in the poorhouse at Westmeath came to her, and said that his wife had often related to him that in her younger days a carpenter had told her that he was once sent for by Sir Hugh Stukely, and directed by him to take up some boards in the lobby, and that Sir Hugh had concealed something which he, the carpenter, conceived was treasure. Some investigation appears to have been made in consequence of this communication, but nothing came of it. £60 reward was offered by Lady Stawell for the discovery of the cause of the disturbances, and this offer Mr. Ricketts, on his return to England, increased to 100, but no claim was ever made for the money. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ricketts was removed to Wolvesey, the palace of the Bishop of Winchester, with whom she was connected by marriage. After her removal, the people left in charge complained of some annoyances, but the manifestations do not appear to have been so frequent nor so terrifying. Eventually the manor house was let to a Mr. Lawrence, who forbade the servants saying a word about the disturbances, under penalty of losing their places. Notwithstanding this judicious rule, rumours were still propagated, and it was stated that once, when the housemaid was standing in the lobby, a female figure rushed past and disappeared. Mr. Lawrence brought his family with him to Hinton, but doubtless the manifestations were too much for them. He only stayed in the house for a year, and then left it suddenly. After this, the manor house was never occupied. In 1797 it was pulled down, and under the floor of the lobby there was found a box containing bones and what was said to be the skull of a monkey. No regular inquiry was made into the matter, and no professional opinion was ever sought as to the real character of the relic. The only person thought able to throw any light upon the mystery was an old woman who had been housekeeper in Lord Stawell's time. On her deathbed she expressed a desire to make a confession to a member of the Jervis family, but unfortunately she expired before the lady summoned could arrive. It is declared that the subject was always a very sore one with the first Lord St. Vincent, and that any allusion to it commonly brought down a rebuke upon anyone who ventured to make it. End of section 119.